Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from Alex Merced Coder, and welcome to back to our Express React build. We're building an Express backend, which we completed in the last video. So we have an API and a React front end. So let's begin with our React front end now that the API is complete. So I'll close the backend folder, go back into our front end folder, and this is a full-on React project. And basically here we have our index.html. Everything kind of runs off of that. It's using the parcel bundler. So essentially what parcel does, so if we go to our package.json, we have two scripts, dev and build. And essentially what dev is going to do, it's going to run parcel on the index.html, open it up on port 3000, a little dev server. Build will actually build our final project, which will show up in a folder called dist for distribution. And basically what it does is it's going to read into this index.html. It then sees a script tag that leads us to our app component here, and then builds out the project from there. Okay, so this is assuming you have some knowledge of React. So just to kind of walk through what's going on here, we imported React. Again, React is the main library that helps sort of compile the JSX and create basically create all that JSX into HTML or into HTML elements. React DOM is what takes the breakdown of all that and then actually maps it to the DOM. So that's what actually turns it into HTML. So React is sort of essentially creates a giant object, creates the virtual DOM that, or the stuff that then React DOM reads and then maps to the DOM. Okay, so just to compare, if you were doing a mobile application, you would replace React DOM with React Native. So React would still do the same thing it's been doing, except now React Native would then map it to a mobile device instead of mapping it to just a web browser. Okay, these imports you don't need. Do I still have the header footer component there? Yeah. So if you use this template that I asked you guys to clone, you'll have this header and footer components. Actually, we'll keep those. That just makes it easier to have your sort of header of your page and the footer of your page. And then there's a style sheet that's already there too, so that way you don't have to worry about connecting that. Just go in here and do all your styles in there. And you can swap that out for a SAS file if you want. And then I'm going to do everything in functional components. So everything I'm going to do is a functional component. So here is our app component. Okay, and then also here's basically where we map to the DOM. So basically what we did is we saved this element, which is the single div that's in the index.html. So again, this div with the app ID, we save that in a variable, and we say, hey, map this app component where that element is. That's what that does. Okay, that's kind of what injects all your React code into your DOM element. So that way, if you wanted to tinker around with any of this, you kind of get an idea what the different pieces are doing. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back to that. So we're going to go to our header component. So that's going to be in our components folder. And we're just going to put like a little title. Our person's app. Okay, and then footer, am I going to put anything for footer? Yeah, might as well. The end of the app, so just so you can see how this works. Okay, and as we make more components, we can always use this little template file, put that there, so that way you can just copy and paste it as you need more components to save you from having to do a lot of the boilerplate. Okay, so there it's all set up for you. Okie dokie. So how do I want to start this? First, we need to do the API call. Okay, which can be tricky because if you're not familiar with function components, you're thinking two things. How do I use state in a functional component? Because I thought you couldn't do that. Or how do I use lifecycle functions? Well, in recent years, they have added those features to functional components through a feature called React hooks. So first, let's create a piece of state in which we can store all our persons in before we do the API call to grab all the different people. Okay, Okay, so let's go back to our app component because we're going to want to probably store it in there now, store the state there. So to create a piece of state, so the cool thing about functional components is you don't need to create just one state object and then stuff everything inside that one state object. You can create an individual piece of state as needed. So the way you do that is we're going to use array destructuring. So we're going to do const, and you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another line up here so I can destructure. Oh no, I don't want to do that. I want to destructure my hooks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do const use state, because I want to use the use state hook and the use effect hook, and I'm going to get that from React. Okay, let's make life a little easier. So const, and then what you do here is your first variable is going to be is what you want to call your state, this particular variable. So this is going to be my persons variable, and then usually you have a set state function. The second thing you get to do is the name of the set state function for this particular piece of state. So we're going to say set persons, and that's going to equal the use state function, and then the use state function you pass in your initial state, which will just be an empty object with an array called persons, which will be empty. Okay, I shall call it, that's fine. Persons are persons. I can live with that. So that creates the initial state. Okay, and now I can say over here, list of persons, okay, and then we can do something like this. How do I want to do that? I want to give it like a loading kind of look. So we're going to do two variables, const loading equals just an h3 that says loading. So I'm storing JSX in variables. Just makes the code a little bit cleaner. Const loaded equals, here I'll put the JSX that displays the persons. So we'll do a UL. And then in there, we're going to map the persons array. So let's see here, it would be persons.map, because again, our piece of state's called persons, which is going to have a property called persons. Okay, persons.persons.map, and that's going to basically be a person that gets passed in each time. Okay, and that's going to be an li in each one. And since that's we need to return that JSX, so return an li, and we want that li to mainly have, we'll just say an h2 with the person's name, an h5 with the person's location, h5 with the person dot h. Cool. And then this variable should be called loaded. Okay, there we go. Save this, let that format a little bit, and there we go. So these two variables contain sort of two different versions of what I want to show up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this: if persons dot persons dot length. So the length of the array is greater than 0. Then I want loaded to be loaded up. And if not, I want loading to show. So that's what that will do. Cool. And now what I need is to actually go get the data. Okay, so let's do that. What we need is a use effect hook. So basically that works like this. This is the same thing as a lifecycle function in a class component. So use effect. This means the use effect function is going to happen the minute the function gets loaded, or this component gets loaded the first time. So in this function, I pass in a function, and then in this function, I can then do my API call, because I only want the API call to happen once, which is why I want to do it in here. If I do it in the body of the component, it'll happen every time. It'll update the state and just cause the component to infinitely re-render, which can happen in here too, which is why you want to pass as a second argument as an empty array. The empty array is its dependency array. Essentially what it does is that any variables that are put in here, if that variable changes, then rerun this function. It'll rerun this effect function. I really have no reason I want to rerun this. So essentially what I'm going to do, and I'm going to actually create a function, so that way anytime I need to grab the list of people again, I can do it again. So I'm going to first, so this use effect function will be there for a moment, but first I'm going to go create a function called get persons, and that's going to equal an async function. And this async function is going to go then make a call to the URL. So response dot const response equals await fetch, and we're going to fetch from http /localhost 3000 /index. Then we have to const JSON equals await response.json, and then what we want to do is set that state. So it would be set persons function, and what we want to do is say that the persons property is now equivalent to this JSON array we got back. That's what this function does, and I can call it whenever I want if I need to replace the list of persons. And I'm going to do it in here. So that's all I want this use effect to do, is essentially, just up here. Get persons, and then that's all that will do. That'll just run this, it'll run the get persons one time when this function, when this component initially loads. So this component's going to get pretty large by the time we're done, just to give you a heads up. Okay, so now we're at the point where we're going to run this. So I'm just going to scroll through this app component real quick so people can see what's going on in here. So cool. Let me just save the header component, and now we need to run this. Now the only issue is that this by default is going to run on port 3000. We already have the API running on port 3000. So I'm going to head over to our package.json for the front end, and I can just change over here and change this to port 5000. So that way it's running on a different port. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a separate terminal in the front end folder. So open in terminal, because I need the API running at the same time as this is running for it to make that call. And then when I do that, so we'll do npm run dev, and this will run the parcel builder. This is going to take a second to start up. Now this should initially work because all we're making is a GET request. And usually when you just make very simple requests, like a GET request, the browser will let you. Okay, so before I was able to make all those API calls in Postman, no problem. But browsers have a security feature called CORS, Cross-Origin Resource. And what happens is that as we start making more complicated calls, like to create new persons, delete persons, update persons, you'll see we're going to get a CORS error. And I'll show you the deal with that when we get there, but just keep an eye out for that. So right now we shouldn't get it with just the basic GET. We're just grabbing the person. Oh, okay, it's running. So localhost 5000. It should be opening it up in the browser at some point, because we do have the open flag, which in Parcel means open the browser when it's done getting set up. But so you can see it's still building everything. So building that, building this. So we'll give it a moment. What I like about Parcel is it's just a lot easier to set up than like Webpack. Literally, you just do that command, parcel index.html, and just make sure that your index.html has a script tag and it works. Okie dokie, built in 49 seconds, and now it's opening up. Waiting for that tab to open up. There we go. Let's see if we see anything. We don't see anything, which means there is probably errors. So let's take a look. Shift I. Let's open up the thing here and do some debugging. Console. Here we go. App.js 27. App.js line 27. Get persons. Oh, I didn't declare this. Save. Let's see what happens when it updates. Okay. Okay, so let's walk through this. We create the state. This is fine. Const loading. That's fine. That's fine. Get persons equals async. Const response await fetch. On index. Now one thing I do need to add over here is a key. So let me do that while I'm at it. Key equals person._id. Use effect get persons is inside the function. That should work because it's defined right here. That's probably because I'm using what I should probably do. Let's change the name of this variable so it doesn't conflict with other stuff. Const result. Make this result. See if that does anything. Okay, let's do a quick Google search on what this. This is a new error. I've never actually seen this error before. This is the first time. So let's take a look. We'll do it together. Reference error, regenerated item is not defined. I'm sure it's something silly. always something silly. I'm building a star template, and when I use Babel register, web I get the system error, yada yada yada. Everything that's really connected to this project, if you need help, you have used at least one of these features, and it's not supported at least one of the target. Async generators function and or async generators. As a result, size. Oh, okay, so it's a Babel problem. Yeah, that could be improved because currently it's unclear how to properly set up a generator. Boo! Okay, so looks like it just really wants me to not use async, is what I'm getting out of that. So I will not use async because I'm sure it has to do with the default Babel settings in Parcel, and I'm not gonna go play with those defaults. So then I will just do this the old-fashioned way. So fetch, and then we put in the URL http www localhost 3000 /index. Then nope, that would be it. Then we just have to do all the .thens. So then we chain a .then, which means run this code when that promise resolves. So that would be response and return response.json. I just realized I don't know if I invoked it before, but whatever. Then we're going to take the result and then do the set person in there. Set person. Set persons, and then again it's a new object, and the person's property becomes results. Although I do want to console log results beforehand, just to make sure we're getting the right data, or the data we expect that we get. And there we go, save. So it's the same thing, except now written in the .then format. Not as pretty as async await, but we'll live with it. Okay, so now it's working. So loading, loading, loading. And oh, we already got the course policy. Okay, we already got the course problem, which is right here. So what does this mean? Again, it's blocking the browser because for security purposes, to make sure that people don't like hack each other and misuse each other's APIs, it's going to assume that you should specify who should be allowed to use your API. I haven't specified anybody. So this is why we got this error. So you see all the React is rendering, but again, it thinks of port 3000 and 5000 as two different applications, and it's saying, yeah, I don't know if this application has permission to be making calls to this application. So we're going to need to go back to our backend and say, yeah, we want to give permission, and we'll do that in the next video.